The old house stood quiet under the fading light. Dust floated in the air, catching the last orange glow of the evening sun. Somewhere inside, a slow creak echoed, the sound of wood remembering footsteps from long ago. The front door was half open, just enough for the wind to slip through. Then it stopped. A shadow crossed the doorway. A man stood there, tall, his voice rough from years of bitterness. "You'll regret this," he said. Inside, the widow didn't flinch. Her back was straight, her fingers resting lightly on the cold metal of the door bolt. Her eyes, once soft and full of grief, now carried something harder, something unspoken. The man's words hung in the still air like dust that refused to settle. He stepped closer, the floorboards groaning beneath his boots. "You've forgotten who you're dealing with," he muttered. His hand brushed against the doorframe, leaving a faint mark of dirt. He looked around the dim room, bare walls, a table, a single chair by the fire that hadn't burned in days. The place looked dead, but the woman standing before him wasn't. The widow's lips curved into a faint smile. It wasn't warmth. It was knowing, the kind of smile that says, "I've already decided." She said nothing. The man's jaw tightened. He took another step, the tension thick enough to taste. A clock ticked somewhere in the background, slow and heavy. Every second sounded louder than the last. The man's gaze flicked to the bolt on the door, then back to her face. "You think locking me out will stop me?" he said, trying to sound amused, but his voice cracked. She still didn't move. Her hand rested gently on the metal, her thumb tracing the edge like it was something familiar, something she trusted. Her silence filled the room until even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. The man shifted his weight, unsure for the first time. He didn't like the way she was looking at him, not like a frightened woman, but like someone waiting for the perfect moment. The last light of the sun disappeared behind the hills. The room darkened, and her smirk deepened as her fingers slid across the bolt. The light faded fast after that, leaving the house wrapped in the quiet kind of darkness that feels alive. The man didn't move at first. He just stood there, one hand on the doorframe, eyes narrowed, trying to read her face. The woman, once known in town as Mrs. Carrow, the quiet widow who never raised her voice, met his stare without a word. The silence between them pressed heavy against the walls. She turned away slowly, walking deeper into the house, her shoes making soft, deliberate sounds on the wooden floor. The man followed, his boots echoing louder, rougher. He didn't wait for an invitation. He never had. He brushed past the door and shut it behind him with a dull thud. Dust trembled from the ceiling, and the sound of the bolt sliding into place filled the space like a warning. The air inside smelled faintly of ash and old wood smoke. A single oil lamp burned on the table, its flame flickering in the draft. It painted the room in patches of gold and shadow. The man's eyes moved over the walls, taking in the shelves of old books, the faded photographs, and the heavy curtains that stayed drawn no matter the time of day. He remembered this room once being full of laughter, back when her husband was alive. Now it felt like a tomb that still breathed. "You should have left town," he said finally, his voice cutting through the stillness. "Would have saved us both the trouble." The widow didn't answer. She stood near the small stove, staring at the cold metal as though it could give her strength. Her hair, streaked with gray, caught the lamp's light, glinting like silver threads. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't afraid. He took a step closer, his tone sharper now. "You knew what you were doing, don't play innocent." Her hand rested on the edge of the table, steady as stone. "I don't play," she said softly. He scoffed. "Always thought you were smarter than the rest. Turns out you're just stubborn." She turned then, slowly, and the look in her eyes made him hesitate. They weren't the eyes of a frightened widow. They were cold and steady, eyes that had seen too much, lost too much, and now had nothing left to fear. He shifted, clearing his throat, but his voice dropped lower. "Your husband made a deal. You can't just pretend it didn't happen." The name hung in the air like a ghost. Her husband, a man long buried both in the ground and in memory. The widow's gaze didn't flicker. "That deal died with him." The man's hand curled into a fist. "No, that's not how it works. He owed me, which means you owe me now." The words hit the walls and bounced back sharper than before. The widow's face didn't change. She walked toward the shelf and reached for something small, a box carved from dark wood. She set it on the table and opened it slowly. The man watched, half curious, half on edge. Inside lay a few keepsakes, a worn photograph, a rusted key, and a silver ring. She touched the ring lightly, her fingers tracing the curve before closing the box again. "You've already taken everything that mattered," she said, her tone quiet but edged with steel. "There's nothing left for you here." He laughed then, a bitter, hollow sound. "That's where you're wrong. You've still got this land. And you've still got what's buried under it." The words made her freeze, he noticed. "Ah," he said, smiling for the first time, "so you do know." The room seemed to darken around them. The lamp flame flickered, the shadows shifting across her face. "You shouldn't have come here," she said. "Why?" he asked, stepping closer, voice dripping with confidence again. "You gonna stop me?" Her eyes narrowed just a fraction. "Maybe," he laughed again, taking another step. "You think you can scare me. You forget I knew your husband better than you ever did. He was weak, always was." Her jaw tightened. The man saw it, and for a moment he felt a small thrill control. He fed on it. "He begged," he said softly, almost enjoying the way the word cut the air. "Begged me for mercy. And now here you are, pretending you're stronger than him." She didn't move, she didn't blink. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and low. "You talk too much." The man smirked, but something in her tone made him uneasy. The shadows around her seemed to shift as the wind outside brushed against the walls. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Last chance," he said. "Sign this and I'll be gone by morning." She looked at the paper, then at him. "You think you can buy what isn't yours?" "I already own it," he said. She took a step forward, slow and deliberate. Her eyes caught the light again, sharp as broken glass. "Then why are you still here?" He hesitated. She was close enough now that he could see the faint lines on her face, the steady rhythm of her breath. There was no fear in it, only calm, cold purpose. "You don't get it," he said, his tone rising. "You don't get to decide how this ends." Her hand moved behind her, fingers brushing against the cold metal of the bolt still in the door. Her voice came quiet, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. "That's where you're wrong." He frowned, taking a half step back. The floor creaked. Something in her expression made the air feel heavy again. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. The lamp flickered once more. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Only the sound of the wind, the faint hiss of the flame, and the soft click of her thumb brushing the bolt. The man's smirk faltered. He realized too late that she wasn't bluffing. There was something dangerous in her stillness, something final. The widow tilted her head slightly, her gaze never leaving his. "You've said your piece," she murmured. He swallowed, but his pride wouldn't let him step back. "You'll regret this," she almost smiled. "So I've heard." Her fingers tightened around the bolt. The metal groaned. And for the first time, he felt the cold edge of fear crawl up his spine. The house creaked, the wind roared outside, and the air between them turned sharp enough to cut. The storm rolled in without warning. The first gust rattled the shutters, making the lamp flame dance wildly across the wooden walls. The man turned his head toward the window, startled, but the widow didn't move. She stood near the door, one hand still on the bolt, the other hanging loose by her side. Her breathing was steady. His wasn't. "You don't have to do this," he said, the words sharp, half pleading. "You're making a mistake." Her eyes met his, cold and steady. "You made it first." Lightning flashed outside, painting the room white for a heartbeat. In that instant, the man saw her differently, not as the frail widow he'd imagined, but as something solid, unshaken, carved from years of grief and silence. When the light faded, he swallowed hard, his voice quieter now. "I didn't come here to fight," he said. "Yes, you did," she replied. He shifted his weight, glancing around the room like he was searching for something. His eyes landed on the box she'd closed earlier. "You're hiding it, aren't you?" he asked. "Whatever he buried, it's still here." Her silence was answer enough. The man's pulse quickened. He took a step forward. The floorboards complained under his boots, groaning like they, too, wanted him gone. The widow didn't step back. Her presence filled the room, quiet but commanding. "You think keeping it will bring him back," he said, trying to regain control. "It won't. It's just a piece of metal or gold or whatever you think it is. It won't fix anything." The lamp flickered again. The wind howled through the cracks. She didn't blink. "It's not his memory I'm protecting," she said softly. The man frowned. "Then what?" Her gaze dropped to the floor, and for the first time her voice wavered, not with weakness but with weight. "What's buried out there isn't gold," she said. "It's truth. And truth's a dangerous thing in the hands of the wrong man." The meaning sank in slowly. The man's jaw tightened. "You're lying." She looked up. "You always said that." The words hit him like a slap. He froze, staring at her. "What did you just say?" "You heard me." He stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "You think I don't remember? I remember everything. I remember what he owed me. I remember the night he begged me to let him walk away." His voice shook with anger now. "I should have ended it then." Her hand brushed the bolt again, almost unconsciously. "You already did." The man blinked. The wind roared louder, like the house itself was listening. He took another step forward. "What are you talking about?" Her eyes lifted slowly, the faintest tremor in her breath. "He didn't die from an accident like you told the town. He didn't fall." The man's throat went dry. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying." Her voice grew stronger. "You killed him." He stared at her, caught between fury and disbelief. "You can't prove that." She tilted her head slightly. "You think I need to?" He moved fast then, grabbing her wrist, forcing her hand away from the bolt. "Enough of this," he hissed. "You don't understand how things work. You never did." Her eyes didn't flinch even as his grip tightened. "You think I don't know power when I see it," she said through clenched teeth. "I just stopped fearing it." His grip loosened, but not from guilt, from something colder, confusion. Her calm unnerved him. He stepped back, running a hand through his hair, pacing. The floor creaked under each step. "You don't know what that man was," he said. "He wasn't the saint everyone believed. He had debts, secrets, and I was the only one willing to clean them up." Her expression didn't change. "You cleaned up too much." He laughed then, bitter and sharp. "You think I wanted this? You think I enjoy digging through someone else's mess?" The widow's voice turned quiet again, softer but heavier. "No, you enjoyed owning it." He stopped. The wind slammed the shutters and a small gust blew out the lamp. The room sank into darkness, broken only by the faint silver light spilling through the cracks of the window. In that pale glow, the man's face looked different. Older. Tired, the anger had drained, leaving something that looked a lot like guilt. He rubbed his face and sighed. "You can't change what's been done," he said quietly. She didn't respond. The sound of rain began to fall, slow at first, then steady, drumming against the roof. She reached for a match and lit the lamp again. The new flame painted the room in soft orange light. "You came here for what's buried," she said, her tone even. "But you forgot something." He looked up, his eyes weary. "What?" Her hand slid back to the bolt. "You can't bury guilt, it digs itself up." He froze, watching her. "You think this will make you better?" "No," she said simply, "but it'll make you stop." The man's heartbeat quickened. He took a step back, but the floor seemed to resist him. He looked at the bolt, then at her. "You're bluffing," he whispered. The widow tilted her head, that same calm, knowing look crossing her face. "I stopped bluffing the day you put him in the ground." Lightning flashed again, filling the cabin with white light. The man blinked, and for a second it felt like the world stopped moving. He saw her clearly now, her face, her steady hand, the faint tremble of her breath. The quiet strength in her made something deep inside him twist. He stepped forward one last time, desperation breaking through his anger. "You don't understand. It wasn't supposed to happen that way. He came at me. I just—" The words died in his throat as the thunder cracked above them. The widow's face didn't soften. "You always find a way to make yourself the victim," she said quietly. "But tonight, you face what you made." He looked toward the door, but the bolt was already halfway drawn. His breath came faster, his voice lower. "Don't," he said. "You'll regret this." Her eyes glimmered in the lamplight. "That's the thing," she whispered. "I stopped regretting a long time ago." He took another step, hand outstretched, but the sound of metal sliding echoed louder than his words. The bolt locked into place with a heavy click that seemed to shake the walls. Outside, the storm screamed against the windows, but inside, only silence remained between them. The man stood there, staring, as the realization sank deep. He wasn't the one in control anymore. And the widow, standing firm in the dim light, knew it too. The rain came harder, drumming against the tin roof until it drowned out everything else. The man flinched with every thunderclap, the sound bouncing off the cabin walls like a warning. The widow didn't move. Her shadow stretched across the floor, long and still, reaching almost to his boots. The only light came from the flickering oil lamp, its flame bending under the gusts that slipped through the cracks. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, trying to steady his breath. "You think you're the only one who's lost something," he said, his voice hoarse. "You don't know what I've had to carry." Her gaze didn't soften. "You carried greed," she said. "You carried guilt, you just mistook it for pain." He looked away, jaw tight. The way she said it, it wasn't anger. It was truth, cold, precise, and heavy. He walked toward the table, the one where her husband used to sit. His fingers brushed the surface, rough with age. "You think you're better than me," he said quietly. "You think standing there with that bolt makes you righteous." She tilted her head slightly, eyes following his movements. "No, I just think it makes me ready." The man turned to her, frustration breaking through his fear. "What do you want from me?" She took a breath, slow and controlled. "I want you to remember." "Remember what?" "How it felt," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "When you heard him plead." His body stiffened. "You weren't there." "I didn't have to be," she said. "You've been confessing ever since you walked through my door." He laughed under his breath, but it wasn't real laughter. It was a noise to fill the space. He turned away from her, pacing the length of the room. His reflection flickered in the glass of the window, caught between light and shadow. "You've lost your mind," he muttered. "Maybe," she said. "But at least I didn't lose my soul." He spun back to her, his voice cracking now. "You think locking that door changes anything? I could break it open, I could." "Then do it," she interrupted. Her tone stopped him cold. She wasn't taunting him. She was daring him, inviting him. He looked at her, trying to find fear, some trace of hesitation. There was none. Only calm resolve, her hand still resting near the bolt, her eyes fixed on him like she already knew what would happen next. Lightning lit the room again, and for a moment everything froze. The man's face twisted with anger and doubt. The widow's carved in quiet defiance. The lamp flame trembled, its light painting gold across the rifle mounted above the door. He noticed it then. The gun. He took a slow step forward, his expression changing. "You still have it," he said. Her eyes flicked to the weapon, then back to him. "It belonged to him," she said simply. A small, dangerous smile crossed his face. "Maybe it's time it belonged to me." He moved closer, and her body tensed. The wind howled outside, shaking the windows in their frames. The man's boots thudded on the floorboards, each step louder than the last. He was only a few feet away when she spoke again. "You always come back for what doesn't belong to you," she said. "And you always think you can stop me," he shot back. The air felt like it was closing in, every breath thick with dust and rain. The lamp flame flickered once, twice, then steadied, casting long shadows over their faces. He reached out, his hand brushing against the rifle's handle. Her voice came soft, sharp, and certain. "He didn't beg for mercy in the end. He begged for you to stop lying." His hand froze. She stepped closer. "That's what he said before you killed him, isn't it?" The words hit him like a blow. His eyes widened, his mouth opening, but no sound came out. The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, thunder rolled again, long and low. He lowered his hand from the gun, his chest rising and falling fast. "You don't know anything," he said, but the conviction was gone. Her eyes didn't move from his. "Then why are you shaking?" He looked down at his hands. She was right. They trembled, barely visible in the dim light. He clenched them into fists, trying to hide it. "You don't understand what happened," he said. He wasn't innocent." Neither are you, she said, his face twisted. He stole from me, he cheated me, and you killed him for it. I didn't mean to, he shouted, the words bursting out like a confession he'd been holding for years. He wouldn't stop fighting. I told him to drop it. I told him. The rain crashed harder outside. The widow didn't move, didn't even blink. And when he fell, she asked softly. The man's breath caught. He looked away. He was still breathing. Her voice turned to steel. And you let him die. He covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking. You don't know what it's like, he whispered. You don't know what I've lived with. I know what you left behind, she said. And I know what justice sounds like. The word hung in the air like the ring of metal, justice. He raised his head slowly, eyes glassy, voice broken. You think this is justice. You're just another ghost in this place. Maybe, she said. But ghosts don't forget. The wind slammed against the door, making the bolt rattle. The man flinched. He looked toward it, then back at her. His voice was barely more than a whisper now. You won't do it, he said. You're not him. The widow's lips parted slightly. No, she said. I'm what he left behind. Another flash of lightning filled the room, brighter than before, bleaching everything white. The man's shadow stretched across the walls, long and desperate. The widow's figure stood firm in front of the door, her hand steady on the bolt, her eyes locked on him. The thunder that followed shook the floor. The lamp wavered, its flame shrinking low. The man took one step back, his breathing uneven, his words trembling. Please, he said. Don't. The rest was lost to the sound of the storm. The windows shuddered, the wind screamed through the cracks, and the flame finally went out. For a long moment, there was nothing but darkness and the sound of rain hammering the roof. Then, through the silence that followed, came the faint sound of metal sliding into place, slow, steady, final. Thunder rolled deep and low, shaking the air as if the sky itself was warning them both. The man stood frozen in the center of the room, soaked in sweat though the night had turned cold. The widow's face was calm, her fingers resting lightly on the bolt that now held him inside with her. The rain hammered the windows so hard it sounded like fists pounding to be let in. He took a breath, slow and uneven, his voice raw. You don't have to do this, he said again, his tone breaking between anger and fear. You can still walk away. Her eyes didn't waver. So could you, she said softly. He laughed once, short and empty. You think locking me in here changes anything. I've lived with worse than you, woman. I don't doubt that, she replied. But I don't think you've ever been this close to consequence. The way she said it sent a shiver up his spine. He glanced toward the window as if the night outside might offer him an escape, but the world beyond the glass was black. No moonlight, no path, only the heavy sound of rain. His reflection stared back at him, pale and trembling. He looked smaller than he remembered. The widow turned away for a moment, walking to the small wooden table. She picked up a small lantern and adjusted its wick, making the light steadier. You've told yourself lies for so long, she said, not looking at him. You don't even know the truth anymore. He clenched his jaw. You think you do, she turned back to him, her face half lit by the golden glow. I know what kind of man you were. I know what kind of man you are now. And I know you never felt sorry. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The wind moaned through the cracks in the cabin walls, filling the silence he couldn't. I didn't plan for it to happen, he said finally, voice hoarse. It got out of hand. She stepped closer. Then why did you cover it up? He swallowed hard, the old anger returning. Because your husband wasn't innocent. He made choices, bad ones. He brought me into it. I did what I had to do. Her expression didn't change. And you told yourself that was justice. He slammed a hand on the table, making the lamp flicker. It was survival. The sound echoed for a long moment before fading into the rhythm of the rain. The widow didn't flinch. She simply walked around him, her footsteps slow and even, circling him the way a storm moves around the eye. You've spent years convincing yourself of that, she said. But you forget something. You left him out there. You buried the truth with him and thought it would stay quiet. His chest rose and fell quickly now. I did what I had to do. Her voice dropped to a whisper. No. You did what you wanted to. He turned toward her, anger burning hot in his face. "You don't know what it's like to be desperate." She stopped walking. "I buried my husband with my own hands. I think I do." That silenced him. The only sound was the ticking of the old clock by the wall and the faint hiss of rain leaking through the roof. She looked at him for a long moment, then moved toward the cabinet by the window. She opened it, her hand brushing against something inside. The man tensed. "What are you doing?" She didn't answer. When she turned, there was a folded piece of paper in her hand, yellowed with age, edges frayed. She laid it on the table and smoothed it out. "He wrote this the night before he died," she said. "I found it under the floorboard a week later." He blinked, his throat tightening. "You're lying." Her eyes met his. "He wrote about you." He stared at the letter, frozen in place. "What did it say?" Her hand hovered over the paper. "It said he forgave you," she said, "but he didn't trust you to forgive yourself." For the first time his eyes softened. His shoulders dropped and something inside him cracked. "He forgave me," he said, almost to himself. She nodded slowly. "He knew what kind of man you were. He knew you couldn't live with what you'd done." He sat down heavily in the nearest chair. The wood creaked under his weight. "He should have hated me," he said. "He did," she said quietly, "at first, but hate doesn't last forever. Guilt does." He looked up at her, and for a moment he didn't see an enemy, he saw a mirror. They were both broken people standing in the ruins of what someone else's choices had left behind. "I can't undo it," he said finally. "I know," she replied, "but you can stop pretending you were the victim." The man rubbed his face with both hands, the rain still beating its rhythm against the roof. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of the things neither of them had said for years. When he finally looked up, his voice was small. "What happens now?" The widow stepped closer to the door. "That depends on you." He stared at the bolt. "You'll let me go." She ran her fingers along the metal, the motion slow and deliberate. "If you can walk out that door and live with yourself, then yes. I'll let you go." He looked at her for a long time, his breath shallow. "And if I can't," her expression softened, but only slightly, "then you already know the answer." The thunder cracked again, loud enough to shake the lamp. The flame wavered, stretching shadows across the walls. The man's face looked older now, worn down by the truth pressing against him. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but no words came. Outside, the storm began to ease, the rain slowing to a steady patter. The widow stood quietly by the door, her hand still on the bolt, waiting. The man lowered his head, the weight of everything he'd buried now sitting heavy in his chest. The air felt still again, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The storm had passed, but the world still smelled of rain. The night outside was heavy and damp, filled with the sound of water dripping from the eaves and the low hum of crickets returning after silence. Inside, the lamp burned low, its flame weak but steady. The widow stood near the door, one hand resting on the bolt, her eyes fixed on the man sitting at the table. He looked smaller than before, his shoulders bent, his eyes dark and distant, staring at something only he could see. He didn't speak for a long time. The quiet was thick, almost sacred. Every small sound, the creak of the chair, the soft drip from the ceiling, the whisper of the flame, seemed louder than it should have been. The widow didn't rush him. She watched him with the patience of someone who had waited too long already. Finally, he lifted his head. "You ever wonder," he said, voice low, "what happens to a man after he's got nothing left to lie about?" She didn't answer right away. "He either finds peace," she said softly, "or he finds hell." He gave a small, humorless smile. "Guess I know which one's waiting for me." She looked at him carefully. "Maybe it's not waiting, maybe it's already here." The words hung between them. He nodded slowly, eyes drifting to the letter still lying open on the table. The ink had faded, but the words were clear enough to read in the trembling lamplight. His hand hovered over it for a moment, then pulled back as if it burned. "He forgave me," he whispered, almost to himself. "After everything, he forgave me." The widow's gaze softened, but her voice stayed firm. "Forgiveness doesn't erase what's been done, it just gives it a name." He looked up at her, his face drawn, lines deepening under his eyes. "What name did you give it?" She thought for a moment. "Justice," she said, "but not the kind you find in the law." He exhaled slowly, the sound rough. "You've been waiting for this, haven't you?" She met his eyes. "Not for revenge," she said. "For truth." He nodded, his head lowering again. "And now you have it, so what happens next?" The lamp flickered. The light dimmed, then steadied again. The widow didn't answer. She turned slightly, her hand brushing the bolt once more. The sound of metal sliding in its frame filled the room. It wasn't the sharp sound of locking. It was softer, careful, like a breath. The man looked up at the noise, his expression unreadable. "You're letting me go." Her eyes didn't leave the door. "You said you wanted to live with what you've done, so live with it." He blinked, confusion flickering across his face. "After all this, you're just letting me walk out." Her voice was steady. "No one walks out the same way they came in." He stood slowly, the chair scraping against the floor. For the first time, he looked at her without the armor of arrogance or anger. He looked at her like a man staring at a grave he'd already dug. "You could have killed me," he said quietly. "I could have," she replied, "but that would have been too kind." He nodded once like he understood. He reached for his coat, his movements slow, careful. The fabric was still damp from the rain. As he pulled it on, his hand brushed the table where the letter rested. He looked at it one more time, then turned away. "Keep it," she said before he could take it. He froze. "Why?" "It doesn't belong to the dead anymore," she said. "It belongs to the living." He swallowed hard, his throat tight. "I don't deserve it." "No," she said. "You don't." He didn't argue. He stepped toward the door, the sound of his boots soft against the worn floorboards. When he reached the threshold, he hesitated. The rain outside had stopped completely, leaving behind a stillness that felt almost unreal. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. He turned back to her one last time. "Do you hate me?" he asked quietly. Her eyes met his, and for the first time they looked tired but free. "I did," she said. "Then I stopped. Hate's just another way of keeping someone alive." He nodded again, slowly. His hand pressed against the door, pushing it open. The cool air of the night spilled inside, carrying the scent of damp soil and fading smoke. He stepped out onto the porch, the wood creaking beneath his boots. For a long moment he stood there, staring out at the horizon where the storm clouds were breaking apart. The moonlight was faint but real, casting silver across the wet grass. He took a breath, deep and shaking, and then another. Behind him he heard the door shift, the quiet, familiar sound of the bolt sliding again. He turned his head slightly, but she was already gone from view, the lamp's glow dimming behind the window. The cabin stood still, framed by the dripping trees, its light flickering like a pulse. He stepped off the porch and onto the muddy ground. His boots sank into the wet soil. He didn't look back again. Each step away from the house sounded heavy, deliberate, as though the earth itself resisted letting him leave. Inside, the widow stood by the window, her hand resting lightly on the frame. The rain had left streaks down the glass, blurring the shape of the man walking into the distance. She watched until he was gone, until he became just another shadow swallowed by the night. The house felt different now, not lighter but quieter. The kind of quiet that doesn't haunt, it lingers. She turned from the window and picked up the letter from the table. The edges trembled in her hands, the ink faint but legible. She read the last line again and again until the words felt like air. Forgive him. Let him see himself. She folded it gently and placed it back into the box, next to the silver ring and the rusted key. When she closed the lid, it clicked softly, a small, final sound that somehow filled the room. The lamp flickered one last time, its light dimming as the oil ran low. She didn't move to refill it. The night had done enough talking. She walked toward the chair by the cold stove and sat down, her hands resting still in her lap. The quiet wrapped around her like a blanket. Outside, the wind began again, gentle this time, carrying with it the faint sound of the door creaking as it settled. The widow closed her eyes, the smell of rain and smoke still hanging in the air. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to breathe without remembering.